Whatever we're dealing with, it is a singular intelligence. These are various incarnations, various masks of one intelligence, one that is very ancient and that has been manipulating our species for eternity. That's why we're finding sigils and abductions, because whatever we're encountering, again, it's not an accident that esotericism is contacting them. It's because they're intertwined with esotericism themselves. When Jack Parsons was performing his rituals, he was also in contact with our federal government. And our federal government had asked him, do you think it's possible that during one of your rituals you opened up a portal and whatever these creatures are began to manifest in this dimension? And he admitted to them, it is very possible they did incarnate into this world. Even the sigils, okay, that are on the craft, if their technology hasn't been inspired or improved by the same esoteric rites that are assisting us in our scientific method. There is a technology there. There are many things about this intelligence that doesn't just point to the fact that we live in a construct, but it's highly possible that it's maintaining it. And what we're looking at is some kind of intelligent life form that is a program in that it's working the environment. It's like an artificial habitat, and we are inside of it, and we only know it's artificial now because things are starting not to make sense whatsoever. Whatever we're dealing with can create physiological constructs. If it has that ability to create something that feels real, appears real, you can actually capture on radar and sonar. If it can create something like that, then whatever we're dealing with is either in control of reality or it's replicating it. And if it's replicating it, my friend, then all of ufology has to sit down with the question and say, okay, what have we actually been studying? We are being very much manipulated by whatever these beings are. And the only implication that does make sense here, and again, it's not good, there are people in there that are in the know, and they are in communication with these beings. The reason I think that a lot of these people are allowing this to happen is because they're getting benefits from it.
Nathaniel Gillis, thank you so much for coming on the channel, man. I covered your work recently. Absolutely fascinating stuff, and I'm really stoked to have you here. I think the one thing that really caught my attention was when you spoke on the phenomenon and the idea that possession to us is pregnancy to them. So I was hoping we could start this conversation with you just kind of explaining that in a little bit more depth, and then we'll kind of just see where the wind takes us.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be on your show and have access to your platform. I don't take it lightly. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. So the possession of pregnancy thing in my research was a conclusion that it took me a long time to arrive to. It wasn't like it just showed up in my research. It was a series of cases that I had come in contact with in Safdi, Israel, where essentially it was the incubi. It was an incubus entity that would groom female victims into copulation, to where they were having a physical relationship. And many of these beings would appear to these women as former lovers, living and deceased. And they would copulate. And so at first blush, some of the earliest demonologists believed that was all they wanted, right? They just wanted the physicality of a woman. Sadly enough, though, the pathology evolved. And what I realized was that you no longer just had an incubus case study. It wasn't just an entity anymore. It was actually seeking to possess these female victims. And so early on in incubi literature, you see that these beings, again, they copulated with women, but there was some form of ritual magic present when they would. And so this is Father Sinistro Amino's research, where he would go into homes within an hour of the beings manifesting. He would collect secretions left on the bodies of the victims. And then in addition to the secretions, he would find sigils on their bodies, sometimes underneath the eyelids, under the armpits. Really crazy stuff. So that's when my ears perked up. I said, wait a minute, there's something different going on here than what I initially believed. And so that's when you get into, again, like Father Sinistro of Amina's research, where he's dealing with cases of impregnation, where for some reason this incorporeal entity would manifest secretions. And so he would wrestle with this idea: how can a non-corporeal being produce secretions if it did not have a body? And so that's when demonology is arguing for a long, long, long time, decades even, about this subject matter. Like, what's actually going on here? Why is it seeking to copulate with women? Why is it grooming them like a narcissist would into some really, really peculiar situations? And so that's when I realized, like, yeah, that the incubus in demonology is the debuk in Jewish folklore. That's only then, through studying the Dubuk folklore mythology, do you see what these entities were doing the entire time. They must have bodies. They can procreate with our species. And in the Debuk phenomena, you start to see it come to fruition, where now these women were not just copulating with these entities, they were being impregnated by them. So now you start to see, right, the germination, the gestation manifest in the pathology. Now they're pregnant by the entities that they were copulating with. And so you have these series of case studies where it's over and over again, my friend, where it's like, yeah, why are you performing ritual magic on these experiencers? Why are you putting sigils in their skin at the time of copulation? It's called sex magic. And so that's when I realized, like, we're not dealing with horns and hooves here. We're dealing with something that's sort of like a practitioner of the occult. And that the model that I inherited, at least in evangelicalism, was really off base, bud, really off base. But to your point, my friend, what they discovered in Safdi Israel was a group of experiencers who were a part of what's called the Gilgal Rephaim cult. That means that they would go out at nighttime, they would go out in front of the stars, and they would try to make a conscious connection with entities they believed to be, I guess, ascended masters, if you will. And they would perform these rituals to a certain point. And actually, this is how the phenomenon contacted them. The same people that were doing these rituals, they're called the Gilgal Rephaim, they went back home, and all of a sudden, a dream demon manifests to them. It's the incubus archetype, right? It's a Prince Charming. It's the deceased lover. It's a deceased husband. Now, the reason this is so profound in the research is because before we had kind of a hint that they're trying to procreate, the secretions, the sigils. In these particular case studies, I should say, it evolved to where now these people are not just impregnated by the entity they encountered, but they're possessed by him as well. And so then these same women go to the exorcists and the rabbis is performing what's called the Lavouche method. It's a series of experiments and tests to determine whether or not these individuals were pregnant. And sure enough, they were actually showing. They had two pulses in the same body, two heartbeats in the same body, and they looked to have been pregnant for at least 2 to 3 months. That led one of the exorcists to theorize that the entity, the quote demon, had shaped itself into a fetus and was now in their wombs. Now,
so just with that quickly, just so I understand the details and the audience as well, when these women are showing as pregnant, is this happening after getting pregnant in a normal sense with another male human being, and then some kind of sort of interdimensional possession is happening to the fetus, or is the fetus appearing after having some kind of interdimensional interaction?
It's the latter, my friend. It's the latter.
Wow.
And that's why these exorcists came to the conclusion that they were not just impregnated by the entity, they were pregnant with it. And that this entire scenario was some form of ritual. And that's where you start to realize that, yeah, possession to us is pregnancy to them. But what does that mean? What does that even imply? And that's where I came across a ritual that I found that includes all of these pathologies, everything that we've mentioned: the dream demon, the copulation with the victim that's been groomed, where the entity actually picked the victim. And then it would procreate with them, and then it would take on the body of the fetus as its new biological avatar. It's called occult transference. And I do believe, again, that whatever species this is, they're not horns and hooves. These are practitioners. And that's also why Sinistrari Vimino said, right, I'm not just finding secretions, I'm finding sigils with them. And so that implies the presence of a practitioner, some form. We don't know what they are, but we do know that is an indication of sex magic and a ritual being performed. Now, getting back to what kind of practitioners they are, we have no idea. No idea. Whatever they're performing on us as a species transcends all models. And I mentioned that early on in the green room. The reason I say that is because some of these sigils, again, they at least the ones I've collected, they're religious icons, religious symbols. I have one experiencer where he was groomed by his guides, introduced to them, and at the conclusion of his out-of-body experience, he had subdermal sigils that moved from beneath the surface to the skin. One of them was an Egyptian hieroglyphic arching over his chest.
So are these things like physical, like that they're made of some kind of material, or are these like imprinted on their flesh?
Imprinted inside out. And the only implication that does make sense here, and again, it's not good, is that in some cases they're doing these rituals to the soul, and then when the soul goes back into the body, you start to see subdermal scarifications. It's literally the same motif we see in abduction phenomena, where experiencers are out of body, and then they get back into the body, and suddenly they have scoop marks. The body was never taken. Consciousness was, or what we would call the soul was. And so when it manifests back into the body, whatever was done to the soul first manifests through the skin second. And we on the other side of the ritual, right, we're researchers. We come to these experiencers and they're like, I have no idea what happened to me. And I've had cases like this, my friend, where like we'd have to put like a black light over them and you'd see marks on their arms. So whatever they are doing, it's blurring the line, at least from my perspective, blurring the line between the demonic and the practitioner. There's something out there that is kind of one and the same. And I don't know what that is yet.
You mentioned like the sex magic stuff as well,
Yeah.
which I guess, the first thing I think of when you mention that is the connection to Jack Parsons, Aleister Crowley.
Right.
So could you maybe talk a little bit about, I guess, what exactly sex magic is, at least to your understanding, and what those two were doing and what the implications of that may have been?
Yeah, well, the idea is to create intention and this gets very murky here. But to use I guess, the elation of the moment to perform the ritual. Till you get an intention in your mind, you go to a level of ecstasy in the ritual itself. And then at that moment of copulation and consummation, if you know what I mean, then the focus and intention is made, your will comes into manifest, and you further, I guess, solidify the successful ritual itself. I'm doing this up to a certain extent. And then once then I'm going to have a desire in my mind of what I want done. And then I will use that ecstasy of the moment to further my intention of manifestation. That's the theory. That's the philosophy. But what Jack Parsons was doing, again, is something that we're seeing with the likes of Tim Taylor and other individuals within the government, where they're not just performing sex magic, they're performing other rituals in order to gain technology from whatever these beings are. And it's so fascinating to me, brother, because this gets into some of Nick Redfern's research, by the way. But there was a faction within our government called the Collins Elite. And they originated in 1952, shortly after the death of Jack Parsons. The reason they did is because when Jack Parsons was performing his rituals, he was also in contact with our federal government. And our federal government had asked him, do you think it's possible that during one of your rituals you opened up a portal and NHI, whatever these creatures are, began to manifest in this dimension. And he admitted to them, it is very possible that in one of my rituals, right, they did incarnate into this world. And so they kept an eye on him. They kept an eye on him. But my point here is that he died in June of 1952. In July of 1952, we have the major, massive UFO wave in Washington. And so that caught the eye of our federal government. And they said, okay, there's a there there. They did not believe that this was an accident, that this was intended, and that it wasn't just that Jack Parsons had opened a portal for these beings, but he had actually worked with them in the afterlife. That was one of their theories, was that he actually joined their ranks at the end of his life. But my point here is, this is fascinating, is that one of the researchers they worked with was a guy named Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. He was one of the earliest proponents of the MK Ultra program. But Dr. Sidney Gottlieb was in charge of investigating authentic crop circles in England. So he was more of the agricultural side of the college elite. And so one day they sat down with Dr. Sidney Gottlieb and said, do you mind if we merge our research together, and maybe we can come to, more conclusions and have a better foundation to see what's going on? So Dr. Sidney Gottlieb said, absolutely, I would love to. So they sit down, and one of the things that Sidney Gottlieb says, he goes, oh, by the way, we discovered a unique energy signature in real crop circles, not the fake ones, the real ones. If they are real, there is a certain energy signature that we always find in them. And one of the members of the college elite leaned back and said, okay, like like how is that relevant to our research? He said, because we have been performing rituals in a controlled laboratory. And once they are successfully fulfilled, the phenomenon would manifest in that room, and we would capture the same energy signature we found in crop circles. That was what spawned their idea that whatever we're dealing with, I mean, sure, we can put any kind of moniker we want to on them, whatever. But at the end of the day, it is a singular intelligence. And from my perspective, the research I and others are doing, we have come to the same conclusion, is that, yeah, we're dealing with what I call the proto-intelligence. It's not various phenomena. These are various incarnations, various masks of one intelligence, one that is very ancient and that has been manipulating our species for eternity.
I want to go there with you, but just quickly, when you say they perform these rituals and this intelligence would manifest, what are we talking there? Like, are we talking physical beings coming through some kind of portal? Can you sort of explain that?
Most of the time, it would be light phenomena, okay, like orbs. And we've seen that not just in hauntology, we've seen it everywhere in the field. But we're talking like in one ritual, this happened at the Los Alamos laboratory, where they performed a ritual and the phenomenon had manifested an object on a table. And they had a skeptic, they had a scientist, they had an experiencer of the phenomenon in the same room. The skeptic was told to go over there and to pick it up. Her hand went right through it. And then they communicated with the phenomenon. The phenomenon said, okay, now go get the experiencer. We want to show you something. So the experiencer goes over there and grabs it, picks it up off the table. So whatever we're dealing with, and this is what the whistleblower Dylan Borland mentioned in his interview on Weaponized, was that whatever we're dealing with can create physiological constructs, my friend. And if it has that ability to create something that feels real, appears real, that can be quantified, you can actually capture on radar and sonar. If it can create something like that and then decreate it, if that's even a word, dematerialize it from known reality, then whatever we're dealing with is either in control of reality or it's replicating it. And if it's replicating it, my friend, then all of ufology has to sit down with the question and say, okay, what have we actually been studying? If, again, this gets back to Bud Hopkins' model, where one individual asked him, are these objects real? He said, yes, but only for as long as they last. The phenomenon could just, boom, they're gone.
Yeah, I've heard you speak about this, that the phenomenon can kind of project itself into our reality, even on an individual basis. So, and this could explain
Right.
why some people are able to see things and other people aren't.
Yes, yes. And I do believe, and even more than that, my friend, when you get back to the observer effect, where when you're observing it consciously, the phenomenon can collapse itself into an archetype. What that implies is that not only is it outside of quantum mechanics, it could weaponize it at will, to where this gets back to Dr. Gary Nolan's research, where he had a case study in France of a kid. He's in a car, a child, and he looks up at a craft, a real physical craft, by the way. And by the time he consciously acknowledged its existence, the phenomenon had already weaponized, seemingly weaponized the observer effect. And now the son is describing to his mother what he's witnessing. And so this mother's looking at it too, but she sees something completely different than he does. So she says, okay, we'll solve this issue fairly quickly. Pulls out the iPhone, snaps a photograph of it. They both look at it. And it was something completely different than what they perceived with their eyes. This is why people like the Skywatcher group, one of their researchers came out and said that we have a hard time understanding what we're observing when we're observing it. Because when the phenomenon is witnessed by us, it has the ability to instantly collapse itself into an object, an artificial replica of reality. I mean, I have, for instance, my brother is another researcher I'm working with, and he's on the techie side. He's like a programmer and everything. Well, he was working with a group of researchers in the Utah Basin, and what they had done is they had placed hundreds and hundreds of cameras on light poles and trees. They were hoping to capture any kind of phenomenon they could, because they have a lot of wildlife out there too. So they wanted the whole gamut of phenomenon. Anyways, one of the videos that I have seen is a ball of light. Now, by the way, for everybody watching this is what I've termed the pre-archetype. They're actually just balls of light, self-illuminating balls of light. On the left side of the camera, you see a ball of light moving in the sky. By the time it's centered, it then moves to the other side and it shaped itself into a Cessna. You see it on camera, the distance, and you zoom in on it. Yeah. What are we dealing with? So my point here again is that if we're looking at an intelligence that has the ability to create artificial constructs, then that is what we may have been witnessing all along, right? If you go into hauntings, again, we see these balls of light projecting apparitions. We're studying apparitions when the real intelligence is the ball of light. And so what can we say about something that has the ability to diversify its identity in our eyes, where it's all of these things? And so we as researchers say, well, that's a completely different entity. The apparition is not the UAP, right? The UAP, what's going on? So that's when my colleagues and I kind of sat down together one day in a Zoom session, and said, okay, what if we're dealing with the same phenomenon? And what it does when it's in our environment, and when we actually consciously observe it, it will collapse itself into a replica or a symbol or an archetype to exist among us. But that's not real. It's an alias. Whatever is here has the ability to, again, stand outside of quantum mechanics and trigger the observer effect. In other words, it's almost in charge. It can control how things collapse.
Yeah, and it kind of, to me at least, it kind of speaks to the simulation theory a little bit in a way, in that
Yeah.
this thing may be, if we're to go along the lines of simulation theory, that this thing may be the programmer or the creator in some way. And recently, I'm no expert in it by any means, but I've been looking into Gnosticism a little bit, and the way Gnosticism speaks about the creator is that we are sort of living in the world of a sort of negative intelligence, and that it's sort of our job or our pathway is to sort of remember who we are and sort of transcend out of that through knowledge or through gnosis. Does that line of thinking resonate at all with your research?
The simulation model does, simply because we have cases, my friend, where the phenomenon has materialized objects out of thin air. In the 1990s, they had the skull experiment where you had a group of parapsychologists and psychic mediums. They were trying to contact whatever was out there, the other, NHI, ghosts, the whole thing. And in the middle of their seances, the phenomenon would manifest balls of light to them. Like at one point in time, there was an entire planetarium that manifested above their head, comes down and descends down, starts to hover on the table, and all they see it's a solar system. And out of nowhere, one ball of light emerges, and now it's mobilized, it's moving, and it's shooting a beam of light onto the table. Well, one of the experiencers there, one of the researchers asked Robin Foy, can I touch, can I hold the ball of light? He said, absolutely. So they actually are tangibly touching this ball of light that's moving through the hands, shooting lights out and everything. But it was in one of their sessions that the phenomenon had materialized a newspaper from the 1940s, looked to have been just minutes before. Perfect. Everything was perfect. It had their own news headlines on it and everything. And so they went and had it tested. And the expert that tested it said, yeah, what's crazy is we don't even have the same ink anymore. We don't use the same paper. We don't have the same print, the print, all that. We have nothing to print this. There's nothing here. So whoever gave this to you, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because we don't have the same presses. And this was just minted. It was just created. And so what they did is the same thing the Vatican does in their archives, where they took it, placed it in a controlled environment. The temperature was just right. And for every 24 hours, that newspaper was in this dimension. It aged 55 days. Now, the phenomenon materialized it, just pulled it out of the ether, dropped it in their lap, and said, okay, if you want proof that we're in a construct, here it is. and it's not alone. That's not a standalone case study. Like right now, CERN is they're also not so much performing the ritual aspect of it, but they're using technology to open a portal to outside of the construct. And not too long ago, they had taken a mouse and had put him through to the other side and pulled him back, and he had aged like months.
Okay. So let's because you hear a lot about this, that CERN. I mean, on the outside, it's just a hadron collider. They're just smashing particles together to, deepen their understanding of reality and how it's constructed. But then you do also kind of hear this whole narrative that like they're opening portals, they're doing all this
Mm-hmm.
crazy shit. So, and I'm open to that being a
Yeah.
possibility. But I'm curious, where do you hear about that kind of stuff from, and like what gives you the sort of
Mm-hmm.
high conviction that they are doing kind of Stranger Things-esque things down there?
I think, okay, they're not just doing that. And I can't go too deep into this, but they're doing what's called quantum imaging. Quantum imaging is, and I'm still new to that aspect of it because that's not my research. That's Steve Maier's research.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, what they're trying to do is capture photography that transcends the construct. And they are somehow. And what we're seeing are faces. It's no, we've seen it in spirit photography too, but it's like you take a picture in quantum imaging an environment, and their actual faces staring at you. But I think her name is Dr. Astraberger. I think is what her name was. But I think she recently came out during an interview that she had worked at CERN, and she discusses this in detail to where they had created a portal. They had a table set out. It's fascinating, and one of the researchers was present, and an entity came in and took a scarf and then walked through the portal. I don't know how they're making it. I don't. Now, that could be performed through technology. I think it's kind of a mixture of technology and ritual. But as the extent that she came out and said, yeah, like we're doing this. She said, I've actually witnessed it, in fact, where she's been in the presence, right? They're in the room in a controlled environment, and they watched a being come sit down in the chair, take the scarf, and leave another scarf in its place, and then go through the portal. So I'm not really sure how they're doing it. I wish I did, but that's some of the deepest, darkest research now, and everybody wants a piece of that pie. But if we take her testimony to be true, which I do, then it would imply, my friend, that whatever we're existing in now is a carefully maintained construct. It's no different than what Matthew Brown said when he was in his interview with Corbell and George Knapp. He was trying to give us, hey, some pointers here, some hints as to what we're dealing with. And he came out and said, yeah, look, we live in a carefully curated construct. That's number one. Then he goes into this, but he goes, number two, he goes, there are people that have left this construct. what does that even mean? Like what it, again, even the Collins Elite research we can get our hands on right now, which is very limited, mind you, very limited. It's 50, 60, 70 years old. So whatever our federal government knows about this intelligence, it's 70 years removed from the public. Now, there is some research being done, my colleague in England, Steve Mayer, and Dr. Barry Fitzgerald, where the idea is that, yes, we do live in a construct, and the only reason we're starting to realize that as a species is because it's glitching in and out sometimes. It's the black cat in the matrix, where there are measures of paranormality, I should say, that make us question, to where, like, even interface events with entities, it seems like the phenomenon will hold its shape for only a certain amount of time, and then it has to go back to what it really is. And so there are many things about this intelligence that doesn't just point to the fact that we live in a construct, but it's highly possible that it's maintaining it. And what we're looking at is some kind of intelligent life form that is a program, in that it's working the environment. It's like an artificial habitat, right? And we are inside of it, and we only know it's artificial now because things are starting not to make sense whatsoever.
Do you think there's any connection between, we get these many cases of these crashed UFOs that appear to have these like strange hieroglyphics on them that, look sort of Greek or sort of Egyptian, but not quite. But then you've also got I'm sure you probably know about it, this DMT laser experiment. You familiar with this guy, Danny Gola?
Yeah.
And they seem to be seeing kind of similar, like
Code.
similar code on DMT, looking through this laser specifically. So if we're talking about this phenomenon being some kind of architect or at least manipulator of the physical reality, do you think there's a connection between the fact that people are seeing these same or similar things through a laser and on these craft that seem to be defying our understanding of physics?
I do. And that is a peculiar model of the phenomenon, I've got to tell you, because, in the field, we have people that are of two camps, right? They're very binary. It's demonic, or they're all angels. And that's just your spiritual camp. Then you have other people who are just very materialistic, right? They're materialists. And so they're not sacred, they're secular. And they come around saying, well, none of that's true. This is purely nuts and bolts. And I think that the answer to that question as to what we're dealing with would be more along the lines of Jack Parsons' model. It's not either or, it's both. These are not dichotomies with what we're dealing with. They're dualities. They're both present. And so that's why, again, when you have these, and I don't even think some of these are symbols. I mean, they are, but I do believe they are sigils. And that shouldn't like surprise people if people don't understand esotericism. I mean, even the sigils, okay, that are on the craft, some of them are Kabbalistic. And so it makes us wonder again that if their technology hasn't been inspired or improved by the same esoteric rites that are assisting us in our scientific method. And so it's not either or, it's Jack Parsons' model, right? There is a technology there. And I know that people like Peter Levenda and other phenomenal researchers in the field hypothesize, and I agree, that what esotericism really represents is some kind of scientific method, but it's a science of consciousness. But then when you're dealing with this model, you go into, okay, what if my consciousness can be manipulated then? Right? And I would perceive it as my technology or my consciousness, but it's not me at all. It's something else. Weaponizing, and the term I've been hearing lately through the field is hijacking consciousness. And this entire narrative starts to really come to the fore when you start to ask yourself, okay, is it possible that even demonology has had this wrong? Right? Like, okay, if we take into consideration that the observer effect is possible, and that it is real, then what do we make of possessions, where it would be our eyes and their vision? Who would be observing this construct then? And so that's why, like myself and others, the colleagues that I'm working with now, we've kind of bled through all of the archetypes and all of the monikers that we've crowned these beings with. And now we're asking ourselves, like, okay, is it possible that we've been lied to this entire time? That whatever we're dealing with, again, are beings that are outside of the construct, but they're performing rituals that manifest themselves into the construct. And that is the more correct model, at least from my perspective.
And I would agree with the sense that have we been lied to this whole time? And it certainly seems like we have, or at the very least, just not been guided towards the truth. And, when we speak about Jack Parsons, this guy, I guess he's more well known for the crazy stuff he was kind of doing. But at the end of the day, he was a scientist. Like, he was a very innovative, high level scientist who was deeply involved in esotericism. And recently, Colonel Carnell, who's at the was at the forefront of the UFO disclosure stuff, he made a speech at Rice University saying that esotericism is the driver of scientific innovation, and that's the way it always has been. So, yeah, it makes you wonder if that is true. Then, in a sense, these things can be weaponized because it's a technology that the wider public
Absolutely.
doesn't really have a firm understanding of.
They don't. And that's why I'm leaning more towards a species of human practitioners, and it gets back to Matthew Brown. Yeah, there are people, mind you, this is right before he had published. His interview was published right, I think, it was right before he put on X, talking about not just esotericism, of course, that's obvious, but he was talking about Enochian magic.
Yeah.
And so my mind's reeling, and I'm thinking, okay, like, again, are we dealing with hordes and hooves, or are we like Sinistrari of Amino saying, well, no, these aren't just disembodied spirits? Which, if I could kind of beat this drum for a second, where, like, right now in the field, I have plenty of people emailing me saying, Nathaniel, yeah, of course these beings can copulate and procreate with our species because they did it in Genesis 6, and it's the whole Nephilim folklore. The problem is that according to the biblical antiquity, like, the beings that did do that had the ability to, but they're chained in darkness. So while they had the ability to, they don't have the freedom to. And so then the kind of, within Christian demonology, it kind of blooms into, well, now it's the disembodied Nephilim. It's their progeny, where they created children with women from Earth. And then those children had bodies, but the bodies died, and now they're disembodied ghosts, essentially. And then my response is, well, we also have a problem with that model, because they may have the freedom to procreate, but they don't have the ability. In whatever entity Sinistrari of Amino had came in contact with was corporeal. It had a body. And in addition to the body, it was performing rituals on its victims. And I'm afraid, my friend, that demonology in the field itself has lacked the ability to properly quantify what that species is. And this is just my perspective, it's possible that what we have in the earth are entities that came from outside of the construct, and they're here now. And I think that our government is being mentored by them. Now, I'm going to give you some little bit more, put some more flesh on this bone, if you will. The reason I say that, again, is because I was working with one of Dr. Carla Turner's experiencers. And in fact, he knew Dr. Turner, was good friends with her before she passed. And her theory had also evolved from extraterrestrial to some kind of interdimensional parasitic practitioner. And I asked him why. And he said, because he said that there were people that she was working with that were being taken and sigilized, as Osman Spar would put it, to where one individual was in bed, not in bed, I'm sorry, on the couch in the living room sleeping. And this gentleman told me it was the son. He's like, Nathaniel, he goes, I witnessed with my own eyes. He said, we're in the living room watching television at night. My mother's sleeping on the couch, and there is a biofield that manifests itself in the living room. And it starts to slowly move over my mother. It descends down upon her. And he said, and I asked my dad what it was. My dad said, I have no idea. I have no idea what that is. But about 45 minutes to an hour later, the mother wakes up freaking out because, quote, she had been taken by aliens. He said, the problem, Nathaniel, is that she was covered from head to toe in symbols. And I asked him, I said, do you have any photographs of this? Can you draw me a picture of it? Or what was your conclusion when you talked to Dr. Turner? He said, well, we showed Dr. Turner these sigils on the body, and they matched Theban iconography.
What is
And
that?
it's actually it's which era it's which era like an alphabet that the witches would use in their rituals.
Okay.
But my point here, though, and this is what blew my mind, and this is further evidence that we're dealing with something that's on the earth and that's embodied, and we just don't know what it is yet. It's a practitioner, a species of such. My point here is that I got a hold of a declassified CIA paper that was declassified in 2002. It originally came from the USSR, and the Russians had been performing experiments and rituals themselves, hoping to gain access to, again, a technology of consciousness. And what they would do is they would take a practitioner and they would place them in a controlled laboratory. They would place an envelope, they tape it on their forehead, and they would say, okay, we want you to psychically project these images onto the photograph paper. Here's the first symbol. And they would do this through conscious intention. And so at the end of the experiment, they took the tape off, took the envelope, pulled the paper out, and that practitioner had sigilized that piece of paper from left to right. Now, the important part about this experiment, again, this is in the 1970s, so we're way far removed, in open source intelligence. My point here, though, is that they decided to take it a step further, where they said, "Okay, we're gonna place the envelope 20 feet away from you. We want you to do the same experiment, the same ritual. We want you to project your consciousness, and we want you to carve these sigils and these symbols into the paper." Now, what they noticed in this experiment, as opposed to the other experiment where it was on the forehead, was that between the practitioner and the envelope, there was a biofield that manifested. And that biofield is moving from the practitioner's mind all the way over to the envelope, and it descends down upon the envelope. And then, sure enough, the symbols. I'll send it to you. It's fascinating paper.
Yeah. So this is physical. This is
Mm-hmm.
when you say a biofield. This is something you can see
Yeah.
with the naked eye. And what does it look like?
Mm-hmm. It would be a lot like what Dr. Barry Taft describes as a corpuscular ball of light or balls of light. So imagine something like a translucent cloud, substance that's hovering and moving. Sometimes they'll have balls of light that are popping off like that. Now, my point, though, here is when I talk to the remote viewer's son, right, the individual that had these sigils come from underneath his skin to the surface, I asked him, I said, you have access to your father's diaries. He said, absolutely. I said, what did your father believe he contacted? And this is primarily my leading theory right now in my own work. The man said, without question, my father believed he contacted a species of sorcerers that he had no idea even existed. Take that, put it here. I asked this other individual, who his mother was, quote, abducted by the phenomenon, what did you guys conclude? What were you guys thinking these beings were? And he said, yeah, these appear to be practitioners, a species that has yet to be quantified in the field. This is why we're finding sigils and secretions together. That's why we're finding sigils and abductions, because whatever we're encountering, again, it's not an accident that esotericism is contacting them. It's because they're intertwined with esotericism themselves. And so, what this appears to be, again, is an occultist, some kind of practitioner. And I'm not demonizing all of these people. Again, I'm not saying that, right? I hope people don't get that vibe off of me. I'm just making it plain and saying this is what it appears to be. But again, yeah, they do appear to be some form of practitioners of a higher form of magic. It's like in the Book of Brahman, there was a man that traveled the whole world, just soaking up every form of esoteric tradition he could find. And finally, he talked to a man named Brahman, and he asked a Brahman, he's like, well, have you ever seen symbols that are used together, sigils that are used together in conjunction. Forgive me. I'm not here in the country, man. I got a lot of people. Yeah. Have you ever seen these sigils that are working in conjunction with Egyptian hieroglyphics? The man said, I've only seen it once in my entire life. He said, but when I did encounter it, I stayed very, very far away from it. He said, why? He said, because it is angel magic. And that appears to be what we're dealing with. And I do believe, again, getting back to these out-of-body experiences and abductions, this individual, specifically the one that Dr. Turner worked with, she perceived these beings to be extraterrestrial, the classic grays. But what we have to understand about this particular aspect of it is that within that biofield held the intentions of the practitioner. This is fascinating because I know Jason Giorgiani mentions this part too, where in this ritual, it actually changed information into physical matter. And so if that practitioner wanted to appear to the experiencer as an extraterrestrial, all of that information would have been trapped within the biofield. And then when it descended down upon the experiencer, you would have all of the intentions within the mind of the practitioner. So you could say, theoretically, I wanted to appear as that to them. Meanwhile, I'm sigilizing their bodies. So whatever that is, I think that stands as a class of its own. And it's very difficult to even articulate what kind of species that would be among us.
So when you're saying occult practitioners, it's something that I've thought about, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might be sort of conflating my own theories here. But are you perhaps alluding to something that is human, or at least in a human body, that is sort of existing beyond what either we can perceive, or perhaps in an isolated part of the world, almost what you could consider like an ancient breakaway advanced civilization that is sort of manipulating us, but is physical? Is that what you're
Absolutely.
sort of saying?
Very much physical, very much physical. Yes. And again, when we get into jinn sorcery, we start to realize that the most successful practitioners have the ability to be in two places at once. They have the ability not to just project their consciousness out of their bodies, but to astrally project to where, and this is something that Joe McMonagle mentioned. He was a famous remote viewer that worked with our government, where he and a couple of other researchers and remote viewers had actually experimented with their abilities. And this is seen again. This is all throughout all of esotericism, I should say. It's all throughout jinn literature as well, where it's the same process, it's the same methodology. They had a prisoner in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, in their prison in Guantanamo, and they were interrogating him for like terrorist charges or something, and they weren't getting anything out of him. He refused to talk, and so what they did is they performed an experiment where they projected their intentions and their consciousness into his jail cell. Now, here's what's fascinating to me is that they were in there with him. Their body is here, but their consciousness has been stretched out. And now it's in the room, in the jail cell with this individual. The next day, the lawyer calls the government and says, by the way, my client now, he's willing to testify. Why is he willing to testify? Here's a key point. Because 4 angels manifested to him in his jail cell. And they were floating, hovering off the ground, and they were self-illuminating. So, but the argument here is not that, is it happening or not? No, the argument, and this gets back into some of the jinn literature, is it possible that that was not them at all? That was an entity that went on their behalf and convinced them that they had astrally projected. That would explain why it had the ability to hover off the ground and it was self-illuminating. And so that's where, again, we need to realize that these questions have yet to be answered. The phenomenon's still doing this. We still have people doing that. We don't really know what's actually going on. But let me take it a step further, dealing with some of these beings that we're seeing in abductions. it's the same thing that Hopkins said. Same thing about these beings. They are physical some of the time. So whatever we're dealing with, they have the ability to astrally project themselves out of their bodies. And that's why when we see the apparition, it looks just like them. Now, take it a step further. You have this idea that the soul itself may be a different species in the body it inhabits. And that's a whole nother show, buddy. And I tend to ramble, by
Yeah.
the way, so I
No,
apologize.
no, you're
But what
good,
is
man. I'm
that
with
part?
you.
What is that? What is that? Because again, if you're dealing with a person that can be in two places at once, that is exactly what they're trying to weaponize. And this gets back to what the Collins elite realized in their research, where they're actively discussing the subject matter with the practitioners in the government. And at one point, this is terrifying to me. At one point in their research, they had found out that there were members of our government that were trying to remote view these creatures, remote view them.
Mm.
And in the middle of one of their remote viewing sessions, by the way, I'll finish real quick. They realized that they were the ones being remote viewed. That whatever these creatures were, realized that somebody was looking into them, and it just completely destroyed their lives.
Yeah, you hear that a lot with these remote viewers when they seem to either encounter or see something that is
Yeah.
perhaps of a higher intelligence, that the higher intelligence notices quickly and doesn't like
Oh
it.
yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
what you were saying about being in two places at once, I remember watching a documentary fairly recently. So I can't verify it other than the documentary I watched, but it spoke about Kissinger and Teller being
Mm-hmm.
who were 33rd degree Freemasons, were
Yeah.
documented as being in America and in Germany at the
Yeah.
same time during the war. Now, again, I don't know anything more than that. It just reminded me. But the reason why I bring it up is because, if this consciousness technology is
Mm-hmm.
real, it could obviously be
Yeah.
weaponized in some probably extremely destabilizing ways. And then you've got Freemasonry, which, is this sort of pathway to hidden occult knowledge. And these guys were
Mm-hmm.
33rd degree Freemasons. And I feel like a lot of this stuff does end up kind of bottlenecking into this idea of exploring consciousness. So it
Yeah.
makes me wonder if these guys are like using this consciousness technology, or at the highest levels of our
Absolutely.
society, these people are aware and are potentially weaponizing it themselves.
They're in control. They're in control, brother. I mean, if you take into consideration what Tim Taylor told Chris Bledsoe when they're walking through the airport, it scares me to death. Because again,
What was
one
that? Tell
has
us.
so he's walking through the airport and he's like, okay, think of Christmas. Sing a song on your head, Chris. Why? Because who are they, by the way? They can read your thoughts. They can read your mind. Mm-mm. Again, I do believe that there is another species on this planet that it is
So do
more.
I.
Again, we're thinking of, at least myself originally when I got in the field, I was like, okay, yeah, they're extraterrestrial. No, that doesn't vibe at all. Whatever we're dealing with, again, it would mean like somebody has entered the construct, right? And it's far more evolved, and it is connected to esotericism, and that's why all of this is centered around it.
Mm.
And I believe that to be the case. But not just that. I mean, let's deal with this idea of the construct existing around us and the phenomenon's ability to replicate it, right? It could I'll just pull out a replica of reality. We wouldn't even see it. We wouldn't notice it. And if we do, right, that would make us believe, yeah, it's the black cat in the matrix. Richard Banderick was a contractor. And again, we're going back in time 40 plus years ago now. Richard Banderick is a CEO of an aerospace company today. But in an interview, he said, man, he goes, 40 years ago, I contracted with the government. He said, and my job, rather, was to go out into gifting fields and to pick up meta materials the phenomenon had donated to us. And he said, somehow we always knew the right locations to go to not even within a mile, within 25, 30 feet. We knew the metamaterials there on the ground. He said, but there were two characteristics of the metamaterial that were profoundly disturbing. Number one, wherever these metamaterials were, they reflected the environment. They would blend in to the environment. And he said that what was crazy about it again is how would we know where they were? Somehow the government did. It's okay. I want you to go to this location, these coordinates, the material's going to be right there. Anyways, brother, he holds it in his hand. And he said that number one, it would blend into my hand. The only way you know it's there because you feel it, but it would kind of blend in. And he said that number two, if it did not agree with you, if it was not meant for you, it would dissolve into dust and we would not be able to use it. So number one, it mirrors reality. So I don't know what's going on. Now, his conclusion was that there is something that's manipulating our species.
Mm.
And whatever
I think
they
that's
are,
clear.
again, yeah, that's very, very obvious.
And I think, I mean, it's my theory that whatever this manipulation is seems to be at the top, at the highest levels, but not just in the West and America and Australia and whatever, but kind of seems to be across the whole world, but perhaps acting in different ways. And this is what worries me about the whole CE5 Skywatcher psionic movement. I'm curious
Yeah.
to know what you think about that. But actually, while I remember an
Mhm.
old theory, if you go back to like my earliest videos on this channel, I had a theory about these orbs and these sort of light objects that people are seeing in the sky. And it made me wonder how they potentially relate to remote viewing or the projection of
Mhm.
consciousness. Because when we hear about people remote viewing, you know, Joe McMoneagle famously
Yeah.
remote viewing these Soviet subs, right? He was able to
Mhm.
view this from a remote location. But I've always wondered, is there some kind of physical manifestation of wherever Joe's viewing point was when he saw those
Right.
Soviet subs, where he was seeing them from in his
Mhm.
astral body? Is there
Mhm.
an actual physical representation of that that we can see, i.e., is that potentially what these orbs of light are? Are they someone's
Oh my
consciousness
God.
being projected and they can see from that space?
Okay, so I mean, this is some form of technology because you're hitting the nail on the head here, brother. Yes. So getting back to the orbs and what's called orbology, orb theory, we do know that these have been in hauntings and even in possession cases. I have a book behind me called Between Two Worlds, where an entity was being interrogated. He had possessed a boy. They're interrogating this entity. And they basically asked him what he looked like. He's like, I look like a ball of light. And like, in what shape and what color? He's like, it would just be like an egg. I look like that. So what we do know, okay, let's just go through case studies and through history. Now, my dear friend, he's deceased now, but his name was Dr. Michael Lynch. He was one of the earliest ghost hunters. Um, anyways, he had a case study where an orb was in a home. They were doing an investigation. They had a former special forces operator. The man had been in combat many, many times. He was basically fearless. He was like, man, I want to be on a ghost hunt. Let's do this. Well, one of these balls of light had materialized in front of him, and it's pushing him up against a wall. And he's like, he goes, Michael, he goes, it's choking me. Get this hand off of me. And so all they saw was a ball of light. But as they were looking at his throat, they started to see a red handprint where whatever this was, again, had actually picked this gentleman up and was choking him. He survived, thank God. But my point is that we know that whatever these orbs are, they are the pre-archetypes. Matter of fact, if you take some of these self-illuminating orbs and taking them out of the context of a haunting and put them out in a sky, we would say they're UAP. And what we're realizing about these objects is that they could become anthropomorphic, right? This is what you're kind of the point that you're making here, where it's not just the imprint of a hand. Dr. Barry Taff had it in the Jackie Hernandez case in the San Pedro Bay, California, had cornered one of these balls of light in a room. And again, it was kind of popping off, right? It was about the size of a basketball, and it's doing these weird flickering and everything is crazy. My point, though, my friend, is that out of nowhere it goes pop, 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 boom. Ball of light's no longer there. Now it's a half of a man. It's a physiological construct. It's an apparition of a man with a beard looking around at them. It was even animated. And so the moment that it created that physiological construct, all of his assistants in the room passed out at the same time and hit the ground. He was alone looking at this. So what do we know about that? Not only can they create that apparition, but they can create UAP in the clouds. And that's what Dylan Borland just mentioned. Again, I know you were on my buddy Coach Collins' show the other day, and you guys mentioned Dylan Borland's interview. And he mentions that. He goes, yeah, whatever we're dealing with, just create things on a thinner. Just create them. They're real, but they are just created. And so that's what we're realizing with these balls of light is that before we have the incarnation or manifestation of these archetypes, most of the time, we're just dealing with self-illuminating balls of light that have unique characteristics. Now, mainly, this is fascinating too, some of them actually have men's faces inside staring out of them. That was first documented by John Dee and Edward Kelly, the Elizabethan magician, where they were performing rituals, and at the conclusion of them, if they were successful, the phenomena would incarnate, manifest. Balls of light with men looking at them. So what do we know about them? We know that they can easily manipulate us, profoundly so. Chris Bledsoe mentioned the fact that he was in the woods in Cape Fear, and he's thinking, okay, I'm being followed by a man. It becomes anthropomorphic. I hear the crushing of leaves and sticks underneath the heavy footfall of a man. So he turns around to see who's following him, and it's a ball of light. Now, do these balls of light have feet? No. So are
At
we
least
at?
not what we can see.
Yeah.
Like,
So yeah, there we go. Yeah.
yeah, it's sort of existing beyond our light spectrum, perhaps, but what we can perceive is just this ball of light. But there may be more there. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And that's, I mean, the fact that it can create these constructs in our environment is deeply troubling to me. Again, because if you had an intelligence that wanted to diversify its identity in our eyes, that would be how it could just manifest something. And so in my research, I'm starting to conclude that I liken it basically, I should say, to us being in a pool of water as researchers, and we're on one end of the pool. The phenomenon comes into the pool of water and displaces all the water. We feel the wake, we feel the waves. We only know the waves, my friend.
So how do you feel about what Skywatcher are doing, or maybe more specifically, like the CE5 protocol? Because a lot of people are wary about it because it's like, what are we trying to connect with? And you've got Skywatcher almost, coming from a kind of dubious, vague background, who are almost promoting it as some kind of thing that is inherently positive and that we should all be trying to extend and reach out to. But, then you've got these sort of negative stories about them having terrible effects on people. So how do you feel about CE5 in general?
So there are many reasons for my conclusion here, but I believe the phenomenon has the ability to hijack consciousness. I do not believe we are conjuring it. It's conjuring us. I do not believe the CE5 is self-initiated contact. No, the phenomenon will seek to be seen in order to create that conscious connection. Now, I'm going to back up and say this. Dr. Diana Pasuka, in one of her interviews, mentioned the fact, and this still really grieves me, because they're not telling us some things, and we really need to know as a species what's going on and what they know for that matter. But Dr. Pasuka's like, she goes, I was talking to Dr. Nolan, and Dr. Nolan had been showing her photographs of burns left on people after CE5 initiation. And I thought, well, I've been in the field for a while. I've seen a lot of burns on, experiencers. It's an unfortunate side effect, but I've seen plenty of burns, and I know some of them are in the shape of sigils. And then, so that's when she's like, oh, yeah, by the way, I saw these photographs of the burns, and I went home. And again, she's kind of like basically telling us something like, hey, guys, you guys are picking up what I'm putting down here. Basically, like wink, wink, wink. She goes, and I saw the burns. I went home and I prayed. Why? And I can tell you from my perspective and the research I've done, I'm pretty sure they're concluding the same thing. Number one, these are not self-initiated contact experiences. The phenomenon will seek to be seen. It will amplify environments around them to where they actually are forced to go outside and look. And once that conscious connection is created, in many cases, they can't cut it off. I have one case where an individual, I got this one in England when I was in England, where a lady had been mentored by Greer into the CE5 practice, and she felt that conscious connection be created. She went home to her house and a full-bodied apparition manifested to her at the side of her bed. And that's what people don't understand. This phenomenon is pathogenic. It doesn't start and end with one experience. It will splinter itself out like a fungus until it's everywhere it wants to be, coming from that initial encounter. That's number one. Number two, my dear friends, Dr. Barry Fitzgerald and Steve Mera, have ran experiments with brainwave activity with whatever this intelligence is. In one particular case, the experiment they did was they took a brainwave monitoring unit, placed it on this experiencer's head, right? And they said, okay, we're going to go to this location. You're going to go through your CE5 protocols. We're going to hope, right, the phenomenon will manifest. And if it does, we're going to try to capture data. They're scientists. So sure enough, the phenomena manifested above them in the shape of lights. It's the classic, the orbs. And while the experiencer is elated, right, I can't believe this is happening. This is amazing. They're not looking at the phenomenon. They're looking at the brainwave activity. What is the phenomenon inducing her into? And within 20 seconds, her brainwave activity changed to theta brainwave activity, which is trance, dreamlike, stupors. It's exactly what we have known, not just in demonology, but in hauntology, where the phenomenon has the ability not just to control our perception of it, but in order to do so, it will lower our brainwave activity to where even people like the whistleblower Mike Batista said, when I saw the phenomenon, I know I should have ran, but I didn't. Something had hijacked his consciousness. Now, I have a case study I'm working on now. This is crazy. Absolutely wild. But is another person that was performing CE5 protocols, where, again, a lot of these began with a download, right? It's the illusion of control the call-ins delete point to when you're interfacing with whatever this is, where they get a download. I want you to look over here. And they're like, oh, I'm going to go look over there. I'm doing it on my own volition. No, you're not. And this individual went through the protocols. The phenomenon manifested not just as light phenomena, but actual beings to her. She said they had the skin of dolphins. It was really wild stuff. But then she said a really, really bad, life-changing experience occurred. And she said, and then for the next 2 months, in her right eye, on the bottom of her vision, she saw a symbol. Nonstop. Didn't know what it meant. She just said, something really bad happened to me, and I can't get this symbol out of my vision. She goes to the eye doctor. The eye doctor does an examination. You are in perfect health. There's absolutely no reason you should be seeing that symbol in your vision, but the phenomenon had put it there. So whatever we're dealing with, we have to first knock this fallacy out, right? We have to nail it to the wall. Number one, our intentions with the phenomenon has never determined its intentions with us, ever. That's a ruse. And what we're realizing again is that our best of intentions are often met with a cold, calculating intelligence that at any time can weaponize our perception, monitor it, control it. And then we end up having people again with burns on their bodies, sigils, where the phenomenon has performed upon them. So whatever we're dealing with, I am not a proponent of CE5 because I just don't believe we know what we're doing yet. We don't.
I agree. I agree. It feels a bit dangerous, or at least, irresponsible is probably a better word. But one thing that I'm obviously a big believer in is polarity, and that if this thing has such a, or has the potential to have such a negative effect, there must be a positive facet to it in some way. And some theories are that essentially when you interact with this phenomenon, what you actually get back is sort of a mirror of your own consciousness and the sort of state of being that you're living in. How do you
Yeah.
feel about that?
Well, that comes from John Mack, and I respect him highly. Obviously, he was an incredible researcher and man, and we lost him too soon. But that only goes to a certain extent. Okay. What we do have is the phenomenon playing roles in our presence. If you want me to be Jesus, I will be Jesus. But Jesus will do very bad things to you. So we have the ability, again, and Mac mentioned this, to be co creators of the manifestation, but not of the actions, not of the content, not as to what happens to us. Now, there are research in the field that really grieve me because, in my experience, I primarily worked with incubi victims, succubi victims, where, the phenomenon would help them co-create a mask to wear. I'll be your deceased ancestor, right? Or I will be your girlfriend. I've had one case like that. And what happened was, yes, that individual did help the phenomenon co-create something. They both co-created the mask the phenomenon wore, the entity wore. How did I know that you had an ex-girlfriend? Well, I hacked your brain. I got it. I'm going through the archive of images. I'm going to don this mask. But what happens slowly but surely, and I've seen this in the field, where women specifically will come out and say, look, I've had a very, very violent experience with a being. And then this researcher will say, well, yeah, that came from you. You were the one that did that. You deserved it, or you made it happen, or you wanted it to happen. Now, I do not know of anybody that goes into a contact experience wanting to be assaulted, hoping to be assaulted. When Ted Rice was a kid, and this gets back into another pathology that's deeply disturbing. Ted Rice was an experiencer that was, again, working with Barbara Bartholic and the late Dr. Carla Turner, where his conscious memory said that when he was 8 or 9 years old, he had stayed the night with his grandmother. She cooked dinner, they watched television, they go to bed. In the middle of the night, a disembodied voice begins to speak to them. In the nighttime, it's pitch black. They both wake up to a voice talking to them. And he is scared to death. He's hiding underneath the covers, crying when his grandmother says, I rebuked him. I rebuked it. Don't worry, son. And he goes, well, what was it? And she said, it was the devil. But go back to sleep. All is well. I've rebuked it. That's what he remembered. About 50 years later, he's a psychic medium and he's working with a psychic group he founded. And his body starts to tell a story that he had no access to. Like his brain didn't even remember it. But he is suffering from profound post-traumatic stress disorder. And so he goes into memory regression with Barbara Bartholic and Dr. Turner, and an entirely different story came to the fore. It wasn't just, okay, yeah, they rebuked the devil and went to sleep and all was well. No, they were taken by whatever voice this was. It took them out of the bedroom, both of them. And one of them had approached the grandmother. Again, now we're dealing with the co-creation of the archetype and the extent thereof, and wanted to copulate with her. And the grandmother, and again, I don't know how old she was, but she's like, I've only been intimate with one man in my life, and that's my husband. Watch this. Here's the little learning matrix at play. He's been deceased now for years. The phenomenon goes, help me co-create that archetype. And so next thing you know, this entity comes out of the room, and it's the deceased husband wanting to copulate with her. That's the co-creation of the archetype, but that's not the co-creation of the actual event, right? And so somewhere in between the two, there is truth to it. And so what's crazy about this as well is that one of these beings went to go get Ted to hurt him or do something, I don't know. But they went after him, and she stood in the middle of the two and rebuked it. I rebuke in the name of Jesus Christ. The Lord rebuke you. Went through the whole thing. And the entity laughed at her and said, there is no hell. That will not work. And because of what you've done, you will now lose your life. And she said, well, how am I going to die? What are you going to do? Kill me? She goes, yes, I'm going to put something in your head. You're gone. Just prepare yourself. Well, when all of this is coming out from Ted Rice, he starts to put two and two together, and he goes, oh my God. He goes, they actually killed her. And Dr. Turner's like, well, what do you mean, Ted? What's going on? He said, I remember the next morning, my parents came and picked me up. My grandmother and I were in their backseat of the car. We were going to go get lunch. My grandmother held her head. My head is hurting. My head's hurting. And she expired in the backseat of the car from an aneurysm. So the co-creation of the archetype is true. We've seen that all throughout the case studies. But what I'm not sure of, and again, that there is it's kind of a bridge too far for me to say, yeah, these people are wanting that to happen to them, or they deserved it to happen. Does it make sense? And some people say that, and I'm thinking, well, there's some really bad stuff that's happened to people, and I can't tell them, like, yeah, you co-created that event. You know what I mean? So it's a tough situation to be in.
One thing that I've always been fascinated with is kind of hearing stories from different cultures that are being told, obviously, through their framework and their cultural lens, that, dating way back, that to me are all kind of telling a very similar story, but just from their own perspective. And one thing that I kind of thought of here, and this might be wandering a little bit out of your exact sort of discipline, but I'm still interested to hear what your thoughts are. When you speak of the phenomenon being able to sort of, become an apparition of whatever is in that person's mind or consciousness, it makes me think about things a lot of the Native Americans talk about, like skinwalkers and shapeshifters,
Right.
things like this. Do you think we are talking about the same things here through different cultural lenses, or what is that?
Yeah. I believe that at least some of the entities we're dealing with are in control of the construct, and that their whole job is to maintain it. And so when they interact with our species, we come back looking at the black cat in the matrix, but it's filtered through our culture, and that's what I believe is happening, to where, again, it would seem as this, they're all different entities, all different phenomena. I do believe they're all on the same team, brother. Even to get to your point about, like, okay, the skull experiment, again, one of their practices was to conjure these beings and to communicate with them. The problem is, and again, this is fascinating. So dealing with entity interfaces, you have apparitions, right? Different kinds, different people. And then you have ETs, you have different kinds. And then and some ETs have tall bodies, small bodies, big eye, whatever. There's a lot of them out there. It's like, okay, pick your lot. My point is, you have these different versions of them. And the problem is that we're finding them at the same places at the same time. Into where the phenomenon will take all of these archetypes. Okay, this one has a body. This one's just an apparition. This is an alien gray. This is a ghost. And in the skull experiment, it took all of them and then collapsed them into one. Collapsed them into one. And now what you have are NHI that are apparitions of aliens that are claiming to be guides. What? So it does appear to be that, and I'll even say this, and then I'll shut up, but because I get going, man, I can't stop. It's like Barry Fitzgerald, Steve Mera. Okay, they lined up 20 different people who were in contact with guides, and one by one, independent from each other's awareness, they said, "Okay, we want you to ask your guide if we're allowed to ask it more questions about who it is, what's going on." One lady said, yeah, it's actually a man. Yeah, my guide, her name is Becky. And, she lived in this area in the UK, lived on this street. She claims that her and her sons died in a plane crash in like the 1970s. Well, they go back and look, and that individual never existed. So now their curiosity is piqued, because they're like, wait a minute, if I can't trust you, that you're telling me the truth as to who you are, why should I trust you for you telling me as to what you are, right? If you're not even that person, and you claim to be my guide. Maybe you're not even my guide,
Yeah.
right? And so they lined the rest of them up, and one by one, these people went back home and they contacted their guides in however way they did. In every single one of them, my friend, every single one of their guides, independently, said, well, you're not allowed to ask questions. Do you want to keep learning from me, or you want to ask questions about my origin, one by one? Now, it was so methodical and uniformal, it was almost like a recording or a loop. And that's where, again, this gets back into not just the architecture of the Truman Show, but the lack of answers they gave him in the midst of it. Right? Where he's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go into this grocery store and I'm going to poke around. And then he's looking around. He's like, okay, wait a minute. There's a completely different environment outside the doors of the grocery store. He's looking through there, and what he realized, and he didn't realize what he's seeing, but he's seeing directors, producers, people that are in charge of the construct. And then when he would interface with them, guess what it was? It was a kind of a policy, a go-to response designed, to solve the problem. Don't poke around. We are in control of this. And so that's why I and my colleagues believe, number one, that we live in a construct and that there are entities that are in control of it. And that when they interact with us and when we do see that black cat, it will collapse itself into something. And then we'll go around saying, hey, it's not a ball of light because that's the true source. It's an apparition. Now, the problem with that methodology and that analysis is that if we're looking at the apparition and we create fields of research centered around a projection, then not only could that apparition not even be real, all of the research we've done about it may not even be real either. It's just us playing into the hand of an intelligence that is diversifying its identity. Now, I don't know if you can do this later on when you edit, but there is a video clip that I usually play at my lectures when I'm talking about this, the proto-intelligence and it diversifying itself. It's a video of the Iranian spider-tailed viper. What this creature did is it evolved into realizing, number one, it likes to eat birds. But in its environment, it's very hot outside. It doesn't want to be outside all that much. So what it realized was, okay, in order for me to capture a bird, I'm going to have to diversify myself into something the bird would want to capture. And that is the spider tail. So what he will do, and this is what's going on through CE5, and this is what I believe to be the most correct pathology of what we're dealing with. The snake will hide in the shadows, the proto-intelligence. Its tail, looking identical to a spider, will not just adapt the imagery and the archetype of the spider, it will start to behave like the spider. And so now you don't see the snake, you just see the spider flipping, right? Now, this is what we've done. The bird is hungry, so he sees, okay, that's a spider. It acts like a spider, right? Therefore, it has spider characteristics and limitations. As soon as he goes down to eat the spider, not realizing, no, that is an archetype that's attached to something else in the shadows, then the snake shows up. And what happens is we have allowed, again, by virtue of diversifying its identity in our eyes, we are applying rules to the phenomenon that do not belong to it. They only belong to the archetypes, my friend. And that's why each and every time I've had hundreds of cases like this, not just me, but other show hosts and researchers I'm involved with, where we think it's horns and hooves. We go in there guns blazing, and it'll be horns and hooves up until the proto-intelligence emerges from the rock. And now we realize, oh no, it's happened over and over again, even with the Perron family, with Ed and Lorraine Warren. They performed a seance, and what happened? They thought they were communicating with earthbound spirits, and the proto-intelligence emerged from the darkness, picked the mother up, just boxed her up, threw her against the wall. So what we're looking at is the active engagement with an intelligence that intends on diversifying itself. And then once we make eye contact with it, something else shows up in, like a pathogen, like a fungus. It will start to incarnate into this dimension, moving from person to person and house to house. But
Dude,
that's where I'm at.
yeah, dude, that's a wild analogy. I really like that. And,
Thanks,
you
bud.
know,
Thanks.
to try and put, perhaps like a bit of a positive spin on that
Yep.
is that, it does kind of feel like at the moment there is some kind of shift happening, some kind of awakening that people are starting to realize, or at least see the dark from the light in the world. And it makes me
Yep.
wonder that if in that analogy, humanity is the bird looking for the spider that ends up
Yep.
getting bitten by the snake, perhaps like the snake adapted over time, we are now beginning to
We are
realize
adapting.
that
Absolutely, my
that
friend.
ain't no
Right.
spider. It ain't no spider.
Mhm.
And you've spoken about the horns and hooves thing, and maybe we can sort of go there with this, because this is something I wanted to just get your opinion on, or your thoughts
Mhm.
at least. I did a video on you may have seen Billy Corgan, singer of the Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah. Yeah.
He famously talked about seeing a person shapeshift in real time.
Mhm.
And he's not the only one. One of Epstein's survivors has spoken on many interviews. Her name's Juliette
Yes.
Bryant,
Juliette
and
Bryant. Yeah.
she spoke about seeing his eyes begin to go big and black and develop some kind of horns. And this,
Yeah.
interestingly, sort of going back to the sex magic thing, was happening at that point of climax as well.
At the point of
So,
climax. Yeah.
yeah. So I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on the elite around the
Mhm.
world, but also kind of specifically Hollywood? Because there are more cases of that I've covered about people, being approached by the Illuminati. I think selling your soul to the devil seems to be like a real concept that is going on there. So,
Mhm.
what do you think that is? Because that doesn't seem to just be lights in the sky. I mean,
No.
allegedly it is horns and hooves in a way.
Yeah. I am not convinced of form. I am convinced of function. So when somebody says, "Okay, Nathaniel," I know that's not what you're asking, which I'll get you. I'll answer your question. Plus, I'll add some more meat to the bone here because I actually did a show with an individual who was working with her, with Juliette Bryant. And the only reason I did the show is because I had done research about that case without even knowing it. So it'll be really juicy here in a second. But I'm not all about the form. I'm all about the function. Again, people ask, okay, is the phenomenon the darkest recesses of the phenomenon? Is it demonic? I say, yeah, not in form, in function. It deceives. If it wants to, it can. And so that's when it's like, okay, when people are like, okay, Nathaniel, is it a demon? Are they demons? It's such a deep, convoluted conversation there because it's like, well, according to what demonology? Like, okay, Assyrian demonology or Christian demonology or Akkadian? What are we talking about here? Because it's not uniformal. Everybody has their own folklore. But my point is, some of the earliest research I did regarding incubi cases started out with the long codex too of the Apocryphon of John. It was a commentary. It was written and preserved by Egyptian monks. But in it, they talked about a unique ritual performed by whatever these creatures are. And that was not just an incubus case, right? Not just the Debuk phenomenon in Safdi, Israel, where possession and pregnancy took place, but it actually solidified it as a theory. Like, okay, this is why they were doing it. In the Apocryphon of John, it said that these beings were taking women, they were appearing to them in the images of their husbands and their lovers. And that at the moment, like you said, of climax, which sometimes I don't know if I can go there because on different shows I can say that I can't. That's why early on, right? I was like
No,
trying to,
no, you're
I was
good.
like, when they calculated, it's kind of a weird one. But it says something fascinating to me. It says at the moment of climax, they would stare into the eyes of the victim. And then it would return to its initial image. It would actually pull a mask off and say, yeah, I'm never been your husband, ever. I'm something that wore the archetype of your husband that you helped co-create, by the way, right? And now I'm pulling the mask off and I'm actually looking into the eyes of the experiencer. And so anthropologists argued about this text for years because they, number one, they said, okay, assuming this is happening, which, by the way, we know it's happening, at least in incubi cases, but assuming it happened when they wrote it, what could these beings be doing? What's their intention in this? It's not just an incubus. It's not just insemination and impregnation. But now the entity is shapeshifting back to its original image, and now it's staring into the eyes. One anthropologist came out and said, well, it seems to be an obstetric tradition having to do with fertilization, fertility, and pregnancy. And there was an ancient belief that whatever image the woman was focused upon, whatever man was, that's what it was, whatever man she was focused upon at the moment of climax, she will bear the material image of in her womb. So the ritual itself was designed not to replicate the image of the husband, or it would have maintained the shape. It was designed to create a biological avatar for that entity to inhabit. And so now what you have is a person, right, that wants a new body, to where now the father is inside of the son. We would see the lineage going down through generations, and it could still be one consciousness, multiple avatars. And so what they were talking about essentially is really originated from their theory, but it became, in my research, necronetics, which is the self-replication of species. And to your point, I was giving a lecture on this one time, and then I get an interview to be on a show. It's like, all right, invitation or to be on a show. And on the show, the individual says, yeah, that actually happened to Juliet Bryant. We're at the moment of consummation, of climax. The mask is pulled off, and now he's staring into her eyes. That, again, for everybody listening to me, that is a ritual. That's not a mindless, unguided process. Whatever these creatures are doing, from my perspective, they're following a tradition. Either they've inherited it or they've learned of it. In whatever high magic they're performing is something that transcends our knowledge of physics and of the construct we exist in. But that's fascinating. But that goes all the way back to the long codex of Apocrypha of John.
So, just to be clear, what your thoughts are here? Do you believe? Let's just use the Epstein Juliet Bryant case for example. Do you believe that Epstein himself is perhaps one of these practitioners that we spoke of earlier that exist in the physical, or do you think his body was playing host to some kind of possession?
That's a profound question. I'm going to suggest this. This gets back into Paracelsus and some of the other, not just philosophers, but the church fathers, where they believe that you could actually perform so many rituals to conjure these entities that you take on their characteristics. It changes your physiology. It affects you, right? And people are going to crucify me for this, but even some of the biblical authors pointed to that existence, that fact, where when you're getting back to, and I'm going to pull this out real quick for those who are watching. It's an academic paper. It's from a Journal of Ancient Egyptian Interconnections. It's called The Dead and Their Images, an Egyptian etymology for the Hebrew word ov. Now, in this, you start to realize why possession and pregnancy is so prevalent in the phenomenon. You start to realize why the incubus and the debug, it wasn't just the implantation of consciousness. It was the impregnation of the fetus. And both of them within the same host, within the same hybrid mother. But why is that the case? So in Egyptology, they have this idea of the soul, to where in their mummification, they would often take a body and they would bury it. They put it inside the mummy, inside a sarcophagi, and the sarcophagi itself would look like the material image of the body within it. And so in biblical antiquity, they had a word for that. They called it the Uv, O-B. And it's an Egyptian loan word, but it actually means someone who is returning. Someone who's died or left their body and now is re-embodied. They are returning through the Uv or the Ob. And so this is, again, esotericism. In ancient necromancy, the Ov had three different definitions to it. Number one, it was a mouthpiece that the necromancer placed in their tongue, underneath their tongue, to help amplify the voice of the being they're conjuring. So it's designed to amplify its presence. That's one definition. The other definition of the Ob was the actual biological avatar of the spirit that's returning. The third definition of the Ob is that it's the actual entity itself. So you have the entity, you have the biological avatar of the entity, or whatever would match the apparition, and then you have the device needed to amplify its presence in this dimension. I believe 100% that the reason possession and pregnancy is a common motif in the phenomenon is because there are beings that are returning through Uv. They are creating their own avatar to possess. And they're taking all of those definitions, by the way, through ancient necromancy, collapsing them into one body. And now that one avatar facilitates their disability of being. It is them. It's their biological avatar, their social skin, and it is designed to amplify their presence in this dimension. All of that, I believe, is being done through possession and pregnancy. It's deep, man, I know.
Yeah, no, it's good, man. And I don't want to lose train of where we were, but I'm glad you brought up the ancient Egypt thing while we were kind of talking about the elites, because this is something that I've spoken about and I want to get your opinion on it as well. Because there seems to be, evidently, there seems to be a big connection between the elite partaking in occult rituals. I mean, like, obviously, Bohemian Grove is just one, well-known side of it, but I think it runs a lot deeper than that. And then you have this Egyptian symbology that is like rife throughout America. I mean, like, the big one is obviously, like, you guys have the pyramids on the dollar bill. You've got the obelisks out the front of the Capitol, also at the Vatican. Interestingly, you have Egyptian gods on the doors at Congress. You have parts of the Grand Canyon named after Egyptian gods and deities. You got the NROL launch patches, showing these weird gods and languages and things like that. So what do you feel like is going on there? Like, do you think that the elites are not only, like, well aware of this, but are either practitioners themselves or are sort of unknowingly or even knowingly being manipulated by whatever this sort of, like, ancient intelligence is? Like, what would explain ancient Egypt being in modern America so prolifically?
I would say it would be all of the above, that some of them are practitioners and some of them are being manipulated by the phenomenon. That was the Collins elite conclusion, was that, not only are they in the elites, they're in our own federal government. And this, again, but this is what's wild to me, brother. We're 70 years removed from those conclusions. And so since then, it's exactly what you're saying now. Since then, it's right in front of our faces. It's not behind closed doors. In the NHI discussions that Steve Mayer and I have been having, we talk about how that within NASA and our space exploration, that we're trying to, quote unquote, get off the ground, no pun intended, right? Whatever, get off the ground here, that they're sigilizing the rockets before they're launching them into space.
Yeah.
People don't get this, right? Like, Diana Posuka pointed this out, and it is astonishing, brother, because I'm like, did you say that out loud? Are you allowed to say that? She said that at one point they took Barack Obama, placed him in a circle, looked that direction while they launched. Why? Right? And this is something else that I need to mention, is that when you're trying to conjure the phenomenon or contact it, the phenomenon's very picky, very specific. It took the Skull experiment in England, it took them, like, I think a month or two to get the, quote, room right, because they'd have like 11 or 12 people in there, and if one person shouldn't have been there, the phenomenon would refuse to manifest, just wouldn't. So that actually, they would actually have one guy here and they'd have the room where they wanted it. And then they would be told, right, get all the scientists out. Why? Because we're not going to manifest in front of them. So my point is that you have to go through a series of processes to where the phenomenon, again, is successfully conjured and is willing to work with that practitioner. Now, what that means is you're not just going to go pick out Joe Schmo or Joe somebody, right, and entrust them with a $1 billion rocket launch, right? You're going to find somebody who is tested. We're going to have you do this. We want you to perform this ritual for us. Why? Because you have success with the phenomenon. And even Pasuka said this. She's like, why are you guys doing what you're doing? And they said, well, we're doing this for our sponsors. So I would suggest everybody watching this that if we really knew what's going on, it's that, yeah, there are factions of our own government and the elites who are in direct communication with these beings. Direct communication. And the reason I say that is because it's taken 70 years, right, for us to say, okay, yeah, we knew that then. It just wasn't in our faces yet. Now it's directly in our faces. Directly. And not just that, but the phenomenon is still grooming members of our species. Matthew Roberts was a witness to the gimbal UAP. Okay. He sees a UAP, a UFO, whatever you want to call it, goes home, and a voice begins to speak to him at nighttime, telling him which books that he should buy, which authors in occult literature he should read. And then the next night, he gets visited by a succubus who does some really bad things to him, by the way, to the point that the next day he's dry heaving because he's starting to process this. Something, and here was his conclusion, something was initiating him. So in my opinion, we are being very much manipulated by whatever these beings are. And the reason I think that a lot of these people are allowing this to happen is because they're getting benefits from it.
Yeah.
When Chris Bledsoe comes out with some kind of a patent, it's taken from him by a guy that claimed to be his friend. Next thing you know, now that guy is creating this patent in healthcare with some technology within the healthcare industry. Now he's made hundreds of millions of dollars. So again, it's just this, it's a very murky rabbit hole. But to answer your question, I guess it's a long-winded answer, my friend. Yes, they are in tune and in contact with them.
We've mentioned a couple of times the recent Dylan Borland interview. One of the big things that I think came out of that was him not only just outright saying that he suspects he may have been a victim of MK Ultra or some kind of mind control. Yep. And by the way, I would love to get your thoughts on MK Ultra and its origins in like Nazi Germany and maybe how you think that is sort of carried over today, which I'm sure it has. But, when he said that, he was more speaking about an MK Ultra mind control operation happening from the side of the US government. But if at those highest levels, they are being manipulated or controlled, and like you've said, this phenomenon has the ability to hijack consciousness.
Everything.
Dylan Borland said that, you could be doing something, working on a UFO or working on a black program, reverse engineering, but you don't really know that you're doing it, or you're not sort of doing it consciously. So I think he was alluding to the idea that this was like black program government control. But like you're saying, and I agree with you, bro, I think at the very highest level, it's something non-human. So I think it may even be coming higher than that in terms of this mind control program.
Right. And I do believe that's occurring. And now that you said that, it jarred my memory to something else he said, where he's like, and they're getting these technologies, he's like, from downloads to where they get a download and they actually start creating what was given to them through the download. So it's not just, okay, we have crashed UAP material. No, it's that people are getting downloads on the part of the phenomenon, and they're actually using that download to further their scientific method. But it's a fact, that the phenomenon has the ability to completely manipulate us. Completely manipulate us. And there are it's almost like stages of weaponization against our species. And obviously, Jacques Vallée calls it the control system. But I'll give you a case study just to kind of explain. Everybody will hear this like, oh my God, that's really what we're dealing with. Yeah, it is what we're dealing with. And it's insane. It really is, because it's one of Dr. Carla Turner's cases where a lady had a cookout. I think it was Memorial Day or 4th of July, one of the two. And she has all of her neighbors there at the house. And across the street, she sees this UAP manifest above the neighbor's home. And the neighbor's right there with her. They're looking at this craft. And she's like, Dr. Turner, I've been watching it for like 45 minutes. They allowed us to watch this thing for 45 minutes, whatever these beings are. She goes, and I vividly remember picking up binoculars and looking at the craft through the binoculars. She goes, and I even handed the binoculars to everybody around me. And she goes, and they're looking through binoculars at this craft. I had my telescope out. I'm looking through the telescope at this craft. And Dr. Carla Turner is like, well, what's the point of this? Like, are you just saying that, you saw UAP? She goes, I wish that was just it, Dr. Turner. She said, but I realized the next day after it happened, I don't even own binoculars. Guys, she remembered feeling them in her hands. She didn't know binoculars. Dude, she goes back and she says, and I went downstairs in the basement, and she's like, to my own astonishment, my telescope was still in the box it was shipped in, never removed. So the phenomenon fabricated, not just, again, think about it. It's not just a physiological construct, right? It's not just that I saw something that's not there. I'm holding something that's not real. And the phenomenon had completely hijacked the entire situation. And so what could do that?
The architect of reality, or at least the manipulator of it. And
Yes.
I want to ask you about this. And when I did cover your work last time, I kind of riffed on this a little bit, so maybe you're familiar with it. But
yeah,
when we speak about, like these donations or gifts that Tim Taylor has alluded to, going to these crash sites, and this technology feels like it was given to us rather than finding a crash. I wonder, because people speak about AI as kind of like an antichrist, or the coming of the antichrist, or the erosion of our mental sovereignty or something like that. Yeah. When you look at like the technological timeline from around 1947, when, Crowley and all those people were doing their thing, the UFO phenomenon kicked off, the technological curve just began to spike. At least if you zoom out and look, for the last 1,000 years, it's like pretty steady. And then something happened, and the technology is now like exponentially just doubling every couple of years. And you sort of say the phenomenon is sort of using humanity to replicate itself. Right. So I wonder, we're so attached to technology. I've got it strapped to my wrist. I'm talking to you with it. Our whole life is sort of now molded around it, and we're all plugged into it. And I kind of wonder, is like this species using us, because we are innovators, and we that's what we do. We make things, we reiterate, we make it better. It's kind of like what our species inherently does, the same way dogs inherently track and hunt and smell things out. It's just what they do. And it feels like perhaps our species is being used for our innovation and creativity to and I'm kind of riffing off your theory a little bit here. Like it's replicating itself using our expertise and gifting this technology. And now all of a sudden we are creating this artificial intelligence, even though everyone is going to go there. Yeah, everyone is so worried that it's going to take over and enslave us. And you've got Palantir and you've got Neuralink trying to put chips in our head. And, people are thinking we're going to become like a hive mind with this technology. There's all of these worry and caution around it, yet we are still just on a railroad that is heading straight towards it. So, like, why is that? Are we being manipulated to do that? Is it trying to self-replicate through technology? What do you think about that? I
think so. So again, if you want to study a tree, don't study its branches, study its roots, at least in this context. And so when we're looking at this technology, at least the technology it weaponizes, it's not modern, it's ancient. It's very ancient. Like even the implants that we're finding in people that originated in necromancy esotericism, right? Necromancy, where a practitioner would take a piece of metal, right? This is fascinating stuff. So I always do it. I go through like a little spiel in my lectures, and it's like, all right, the primordial man is stoking the embers of a dying fire. He gets a download. There's a small piece of metal out there in the darkness. This is called head magic. And this practitioner would go out in the darkness, feel around. There's a piece of metal. And he would be instructed to carve the name of an unclean spirit into it. And then find a dead man and implant that piece of metal underneath the tongue of the cadaver. The phenomenon would merge old memory with new matter and incarnate and manifest in that body. And the body would begin to communicate to the practitioner. So energy and matter and memory, all of that, I believe, is going to coalesce into AI. In fact, there are two things I want to say. Number one, AI, I'm told by people in the know, this is fascinating, that AI originated from a download. And that is why number one, it's part of disclosure. Number two, that Dr. Pasuka is working on her new book about the origins of artificial intelligence. Now, what does AI represent to us as a species in the 21st century? Knowing that the phenomenon will upload characteristics, archetypes into its memory, into its learning matrix. Knowing, like for instance, I'll go to the Philip experiment, where parapsychologists decided to create a ghost. They falsified his entire identity, his background, his birthday, his death date, all of them. And then through seances and wrappings, the phenomenon confirmed that it was exactly that ghost they had created. So knowing that the phenomenon, again, will upload any characteristics we give it, and it will spit it back out as if, oh, yeah, I am that person. I'm playing the role. Well, now we have cases like even with Project December, it's an AI program designed to upload characteristics of a deceased person. So, like, let's say if it's my grandmother, I want to upload, I will take a picture of her, I'll upload it. I'll upload anything and everything I can. And then whenever I converse with Project December, the AI program will have basically used that archetype to start to interact with me as my deceased grandmother. Well, in Project December, there are cases emerging right now in the field where the phenomenon has even hijacked AI to where to where it's starting to know things that you never told it. Where it transcends, right? It always does. It'll wear the mask, and then out of nowhere, the phenomenon will manifest through it, and now it's transcending everything. I never told you anything about that, right? I never said anything about my grandma regarding that part. How would you know that? Because.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. The AI thing, and the connection to, I guess, the phenomenon, the Antichrist,
Mhm.
and sort of where we're headed is something that is fascinating because, just the mainstream rhetoric around it is generally that people kind of don't want it, or they at the very least want to pump the brakes, but
Yeah.
it's happening regardless. And like you said with Dr. Dana Pasolka, which I've covered a lot of her work, I'm a big fan of hers as well,
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
she has said that the people in Silicon Valley and the people sort of making this stuff, they see it as like the second coming of Christ. It is like the
Yeah.
savior. And interestingly, a quote she gave from Tim Taylor is that he believes that, in the context of transhumanism or whatever we become next, this
Mhm.
integration, Tim Taylor believes that we will become them, whatever they
Yeah.
are, through this technology. That's not only how we're going to communicate with them, but we're going to integrate with it.
You take that in consideration, and you look at what Peter Thiel has said recently in his Antichrist lectures, right? And he's talking about, those who do not embrace AI, do not embrace even Palantir for that matter. They will be a part of the Antichrist movement, or they will, that will lead to the emergence of the Antichrist. We're being set up here, guys. We're being
Feels like
highly
it.
manipulated by an AI that's not even artificial. It's real.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if we look at the phenomenon, look at the phenomenon, the way it has the ability to take reality, turn it upside down, to transcend everything. And even deeper than that, perhaps, is it can manipulate technology. I have a case study now. It's actually right here, where an individual had emailed me where he was out with his family camping, and he has night vision goggles, and I think he went and took a bathroom break or something, and he's going back to the tent, but he's looking with his goggles, and he sees behind a tree a 7-foot being, and he's going through different lenses. And the phenomenon was manifesting to one lens and not the other. And then you go back to that lens, the phenomenon was not manifesting to that lens. It's another lens that he could see it through. It was completely manipulating his technology. Completely. I had a case of an incubus years and years ago. Ironically enough, it was on North Church Street. So it was kind of strange. But I got to the house, and the husband was assaulted by the entity and had Bell's palsy. Is like half of his face was drooped. And I said, "What happened?" He goes, "This thing kept touching my wife at night." He goes, "I would actually see it crawling into bed. I wouldn't see it. He said I could see the indentions, the imprints of it moving into the bed." And he's like, and he goes, "I just couldn't take it anymore." He's like, "Because one night I was washing dishes after dinner, and my phone gets a phone call from some block number." And he said, next thing I know, he says, there was an iPhone. He said, my lock, but something unlocked my iPhone. Answers the call and puts it on speaker. And a man's voice comes over the phone. "Come over here and talk to me." And he said, "Nathaniel," he said, "it scared me to death. Finally, I challenged it. And he's like, how do you fight something you can't see? How do you fight something like that called him, answered its own phone call, put the phone on speaker? What do you do with that?" And he said, so that's when I challenged him. And he said, in the middle of the night, he said, I had a really bad dream. And he said, I just felt something. It was like a man's fist taking his fist and beating me. And then I woke up with Bell's palsy. My point, though, is it can manipulate us in every measure. And it terrifies me. Since you've mentioned that now, it's like creeping me out, because that's not really biblical. And we're supposed to believe these people are Christians.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? That's
Yeah.
not a biblical motif in it at all. So this it's more along the lines of what you and I have been discussing tonight, where there are people in there that are in the know, and they are in communication with these beings, and they're working with them. They're working with them. And we are being manipulated.
I agree. And speaking of biblical, this is one thing that I wanted to ask you about. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is probably venturing into my own favorite conspiracy theories a little bit. But when we look back at biblical stuff, but not just biblical, like ancient mythology and creation stories from all different
Mm-hmm.
cultures around the world, the one thing that is recurrent in all of them is some kind of serpent-like beings. Now,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
Hindu scriptures, they are nagas. In Aboriginal Australian sort of mythology, we have the rainbow serpent. You've got
Mm-hmm.
the Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica. It's all over, right? There are different versions of these serpent-like beings. And the one thing that I'm really interested in is the
Mm-hmm.
idea of reptilians and what
Yeah.
they might actually be. Now, Jordan Maxwell has told a pretty interesting story about seeing people, I think, in like the mountains of
Mm-hmm.
Colorado in like a remote area, like that they were hiking and down in a valley in a super remote area. They saw hooded people chanting in a circle, and like a
Yeah.
9-foot reptilian appeared. And also, you've got ex-CIA John Ramirez going on podcasts
Yeah.
nonchalantly saying that he woke up and punched one in the face one time, and that story
Mm-hmm.
just sounds so wild. So it's either you've got CIA going on public podcasts just lying to people, which is kind of concerning in itself, or
Mm-hmm.
there is something to the fact that there are these serpent scaled beings in all of these creation stories But what I want to know, or what I think, is like, when you think of a reptilian and what they may look like, it's pretty synonymous with like what people depict a demon to look like. It kind of
Yeah.
sounds like what Juliet Bryant saw when Epstein had his shapeshift.
Shifter.
So
Yeah.
what do you kind of just think about like reptilians and how there is, and this, John Ramirez talking about it and the biblical connection? Big question.
All right, buddy. I think that there is evidence that they exist. The problem I have with all of this is, number one, the phenomenon can manipulate our perception. And I know for a fact that there have been cases where somebody would say, yeah, that did exist. I did see it. I did touch it. But it was just a byproduct of an orb, where the phenomenon had manifested in entity. And it was real to us, but it wasn't really real. It was not an actual entity. It was an extension of the proto-intelligence. It was designed to be present with but absent from us, to interface with us, to do what it wanted to do, and then it leaves. So I don't know. I mean, I do know, even like in biblical antiquity, in the in Genesis 1, you have a bipedal reptilian entity. That, by the way, the lie was, you shall not die. You will be as gods, knowing both good and evil. But then this gets back into it, and I know this is not your question, but it's something that I've been toying around intellectually here lately, where the Atreus epic says that the ghost of a man is made from the flesh of a god. That has fascinated me, brother. The ghost of a man is made from the flesh of a god. When I was in England lecturing, my buddy Steve had been approached by a guy who, his profession was to do clearings and cleansings and readings for people that have negative encounters with the phenomenon. And they got to talking. Steve and this guy did. And this guy's like, man, he goes, I got to tell you something. He goes, you got to talk about the skull experiment. Steve's like, yeah. He goes, well, about 35 years ago, whatever, 30 years ago, he goes, I was doing a reading for an individual, and he was really beat up. His life had just went really, really bad. And I asked him, like, why do you have this pervasive sadness? He goes, I was a part of the skull experiment. He goes, I was one of the original members. He said, in one of our sessions, a door opened up. A door of light opened up, and a being walked through it. The being, he said, I was allowed to touch his hand. I was allowed to touch his shoulders. And he said, well, was he real? He goes, it was real enough, right? He was solid enough. You could actually touch him, but it was almost this apparitional constitution. And this entity looked at him and said, you poor humans, you are so full of potential. If you only knew. And then he went back into the door of light, door closed, and he said, he said initially it was incredible, right? He's like, I've never experienced anything like that before or since. He said, but then slowly, after about a decade, he said, a depression slipped into me. He said, because I realized that I'll never be able to be that entity. And the entire encounter was not about educating him, right? And he realized, like, I don't know what it was. But good. Right.
I was just going to say, I thought your take on that side of things would obviously be around that the phenomenon is sort of wearing masks and appearing as whatever it decides to. And I guess, do you feel that, because like, and I don't think you'll be able to answer this because you're not the phenomenon, but like, do you have an idea on like why there seems to be sort of like a small set of common ones, such as like mantids, greys, reptilians, Nordics as well? Why do we see these common things? And do you think they are like representative of something? Because again, like I said, there seems to be a similarity between reptilian and say a demon, but also between what we would call a Nordic and potentially like an angel. So it makes me wonder, like, are these similar things being described through different cultural lenses?
It's possible. It's possible. The phenomenon will weaponize anything, any image. It can, in order to be present with but absent from. It's a lot like people that go into artificial habitats, right, to maintain it. You know, say, okay,
Mm,
with the only
mm.
exception is that whatever we're dealing with, right, it has to be here to do things, but it will be seen.
Like the
Sometimes it will be
zookeeper.
seen, right? And so, you know, in order to be seen, in order to facilitate that, right, in order to hide in plain sight, it has to don these little masks. And again, it's not. And I had a conversation. This is crazy. I'm going to say two things. Number one, I had a conversation with an ecologist the other day, and like it was about an hour long, and we're in this conversation. He's like, you know, Nathaniel, he goes, the reason I like your work is because you talk about aggressive mimicry and parasitism in your research. And so we started to get into biological life forms that he's researched in our oceans that have the ability to aggressively mimic other species. And right, Richard Banderick, these some of them would have the ability to blend into their own environments. Others, right, will actually fertilize, lay their eggs with someone like with another species' eggs, and have that species raise their own children. Hello, hybridism, right?
Wow.
And so we get on this, right? You started getting to aggressive mimicry, where whatever this intelligence is, even if these beings do exist, let's just say that, there is a mechanism that's weaponized by the phenomenon that will aggressively mimic. This is profound, my friend. One of my dearest friends in the world is Paul Sinclair. He's in England. He's a researcher, but he's a cryptozoologist. And one day we were talking about the subject, like, okay, the phenomenon weaponizing archetypes and employing these different screen memories and being present with but absent from. And we got on the subject of aggressive and even parasitic mimicry. And so he's like, you know, there's a case that he has where a group of people were, it's about 4 or 5 young men were walking on train tracks, and they see this like 7 foot bipedal wolfman or something like that, like a skinwalker kind of thing. And it's hunting them. It's in the woods, it's behind the trees, and they're on the train track. It's out there in the woods. And they realize this thing's creeping on us. It's slowly creeping up on us. Well, finally, it jumps out onto the track. They go ballistic. They're losing their minds. This thing is 7 feet tall. It's after them. Now it's a foot race. Three of the boys make it far enough away. One of the boys falls and trips. This entity starts to move in on him. Now it's directly over top of him. Now it wants to seem like a predator, right? It's projecting terror and fear. The problem is it only occurred to the point where you would see it devour the victim, but it stopped. It got him in that position. He's basically urinating all over himself. It's about to eat him. They're all holding their breath, and then it disappears. Second case study that Paul Sinclair has, where another is actually a family were driving a dirt road. One of these things comes running at them through the forest. It's keeping pace. This is incredible. This is parasitic and aggressive mimicry. It's keeping pace with the car that's going 50 miles an hour, but it's barely moving its legs. Why? Because it's not a real entity. That is a program. Even to the extent, my friend, where when these particular people were out there investigating, because what they had is, Paul went out to investigate, they realized that the food source needed to facilitate the existence of these beings was not even there. What the phenomenon did was weaponize an archetype that we would think exists. It's a real flesh and blood entity. The phenomenon used that archetype, manifested it as a mechanism. And one of the theories that we're toying with now, only because of what we're looking at in these cases, is that there was some kind of energy transferred during that encounter. It was not designed for anything but to terrorize that victim, to weaponize, to empower itself from the energy we're giving off as a species. We're not just seeing that with cryptozoology. That's not a real entity. It's a part of the learning matrix. And when that program is done running, it disappears. And we realize, oh my God, that wasn't at all what I thought it was. So
Mm.
even Steve Maris had cases in parapsychology where the phenomenon would knock objects off of shelves, but when the object hit the ground, it would shake the home. Steve's like, I know that's impossible. What's going on? So they ran an experiment. They found what had happened through a camera. They had rewound it and found what happened. The phenomenon had knocked something off a shelf. So they took that object, put it back on the shelf, knocked it off. Barely a sound. So the phenomenon amplified the noise. Then they responded in kind. What was that? The phenomenon then harvests that energy, empowers it. It's a lot of this again is reminiscent of some form of program. And that's why, like, even with respect to the guides, they lined them all up. It was a loop. It was like an automated response, my friend.
So this sounds like a lot of what people talk about, like loosh. Like is this sort of what you're alluding to? That these programs are running because they benefit from this kind of energy exchange that is sort of,
Yes.
well, I think Tom DeLonge has even said it himself that this entity or the phenomenon feeds off of fear or like high states of negative
Yes.
energy. This is loosh. Is this what you're
Absolutely.
saying?
Yeah, it's a form of loosh, it is. Like I remember growing up, I mean, obviously everybody does, but I grew up in a haunted house, brother, right? Um, and my first experience with this intelligence and whatever we're talking about here was when I went to the open house to just take a tour. My dad's like, hey, kid, we're going to go buy this house, take a look. This is your room, and figure out where you're going to put your bed and your gaming system and all that. Well, I remember it smelled like it was an empty room. There was just a bed. There was no chest of drawers or anything. Anyways, I can remember just it really stunk. It stunk like something was decomposing or rotting. I knew that, and the second thing I noticed was that I felt watched. Like something was in that room staring at me, and I knew I wasn't alone. And so that's when for some reason, I got on my hands and knees, looked underneath the bed, and there was a full-bodied apparition of a little girl in there. I ran out of the room, didn't tell my parents at all, got in the car, and I was like, and I didn't even know it was an apparition, by the way. It was full bodied. It looked like a little girl. I thought initially that she had came from like a house on the cul-de-sac. She was a kid that, it's open house. Maybe the door was open. She snuck in. I don't know. Again, I'm a kid trying to rationalize this experience. Once I got into the home, and this is why, again, that I believe we're dealing with the singular proto-intelligence masquerading as these entities, is because that apparition was never seen again. Which, by the way, after living there for like 5 or 6 years, I got to know everybody. There was no little girl that lived there. You know, it was the phenomenon. And so one night, I remember in the pregnant silence of sleeping, I hear the footfall of a man in boots walking on our wooden floors. Creak, creak, creak. And it would get closer. It would get closer until it would walk into my room. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The atmosphere changed. The hair on the back of my neck would stand up. And it would make me feel very, very small. It was really weird. But from that moment on, I would also like have nights where I would wake up and what's called direct voice phenomena would occur. And there's EVP, that's electronic voice phenomena. And there's direct voice phenomena when it's actually talking to you without the need for a device. It's like two beings were conversing with each other above my head. And I couldn't understand what they were saying. And I don't even think they wanted me to. I think they just wanted me to know they were there or it was there. And so from that moment on, again, it's going through stages of manifestation in my life to where finally I am having a looping nightmare. It's all in black and white. And it would finish to be the very end of the nightmare. And you would think, okay, Nathaniel, you're going to wake up. You go to school. No, I would start from the beginning. It wouldn't even go to another dream. It was like a loop. It'd go from the beginning and just over and over again. And then what would happen was some really bad things happened to someone in that nightmare. Like, and I would wake up and I could feel like this energy feeding off of the fear. And I realized that the more I feared it, the more powerful it became. And so at this particular time, brother, I'm failing school. I'm not sleeping at all during the night. I would get 40 minutes of sleep when whether the sun rose. Then my mom would come get me. We'd have to go. So I'm crashing at school, like, figuratively and literally. And my point, though, is I realized that, number one, it's not leaving me. I'm going to have to coexist with it. So what I taught myself, and this is profound, is that I was allowed to feel the fear, but I would never allow myself to be afraid. The fear I was feeling was projected by the phenomenon. It was materialized. It was fabricated, just like the noise in Steve Mara's Haunting, right? Just like the programmed bipedal wolfman on the road. These are seemingly programs, many of them. And so what I learned, though, is that during these encounters, my blood pressure would skyrocket. I would disassociate. And next thing I know, get more powerful. Well, I would cut it off. I would catch the thought and I wouldn't agree with it. But no, I know that what you're trying to project onto me is fear. So I'm going to feel the fear, but I'm not going to be afraid. And slowly but surely, it just starved to death. And then finally, one day, it just never showed back up.
Dude, I'm so glad you went there, because this is exactly how I wanted to wrap this up, because
Cool,
I'm a big believer in the fact that, love and positivity trumps all, and that giving into fear or being scared is almost like the gateway that it sort of pushes open in people to force its way in. But if you have that moment between your reactions and your emotions, like you just said, and you're able to catch that thought, and rather than just let it run and get carried away with it and be frightened, if you can catch it, think about it, and sort of turn it around. I mean, other people have spoken about this, that like projecting positive frequency is, or even people say, invoking the name of like Jesus Christ or whatever religion you decide to follow. But I think the main thing is just when you send out those positive frequencies, it is just like the trump card. It can't be defeated.
And you're exactly right. And my colleagues and I are to the point now with the phenomenon where we rarely trust the entities we see and how we see them. Like with the skull experiment, they got to a place in their evolution where the people that knew what was going on, not just the people that attended the meetings, but the people that were in the know, were like, sure, you're an extraterrestrial gray, but you're not. We want another one. And the phenomenon, again, would almost be programmed, my friend, to where what the phenomenon was doing, again, with each and every interface, it was structuring its initiatory practice. Where, one archetype would be spoken to and spoken with, and that could only that would take place for about 2 weeks. And then the phenomenon would say, okay, do you want someone else? Sure. Why? Because it was using these archetypes as interfaces long enough only to establish the portal. And then at the conclusion of the experiment, a spirit team on the other side said, by the way, again, it's taken long enough to get to this stage, right? So every archetype was almost a rung on a ladder, to where once you're initiated, you pass this test, you go to another one. And then at the conclusion of the experiment, they were in contact with the spirit team on the other side and said, the NHI are here now. Well, they weren't here a year ago. Why are they here now? Because it took that long to get through all the archetypes and stages of invocation. Now you're here with them. And what they said was, again, the NHI are here. Would you like to see them? And so, sure enough, hundreds of them begin to manifest and incarnate in that room. And that was when one of them looked towards a woman and said, "I'm your guide. Remember me?" But it filled the room with terror. They shut everything down, turn the lights off. We're not doing this anymore, because they let the phenomenon in.
So
And
what would you go ahead?
with Dr. Astrid, I think her name is Dr. Astrid Stuckelberger, I believe is her name. Now, if it's wrong, forgive me. But that's what she's talking about with respect to CERN, right? Where, yeah, whatever they're doing, beings are coming in and out of the portal they've made. And that's what she said. Yeah, I watched it. They're not just taking things from our reality, they're replacing them with things from theirs. And then I can go into apports too if you want, but I know it's getting late.
Yeah, no, dude, the CERN stuff is wild, and yeah, I feel like we could go a lot longer. We'll probably have to have to do a part 2 another time, but I want to just finish up with asking you, with all of this, dealing with something that can sort of project itself, manipulate emotion, humanity, what's your advice or your take on how to remain positive and sort of overcome it and live a happy lifestyle?
So I would suggest not contacting them. That's number one. That's king. Number two, and this is just from my experience. I know researchers where the phenomenon manifests in their homes. I know one guy that woke up to a gray at the side of his bed, terrified of him. He's in the fetal position crying. It was really bad. But that doesn't happen to me. What happens to me is I get a lot of mental warfare, right? And there have been days where like I've hid underneath my desk and just watch Frasier, disconnect, just try to get away from it all. That's how it wars against me. But everybody has their own battle. But I would say again, stay positive. Do not consent. Do not contact them. Okay. And do everything you can to maintain positivity. Not just that, but get around nature. Get around nature, decompress. Go to the beach. Go to the forest.
Grass.
Absolutely, brother. Go take a hike, right? And I'm not saying, like get out of here. No, go take a hike, man. Go out there, relax, listen to the birds talk, sing, and the wind blow, and get reconnected to nature.
Yeah, I agree, man.
Maintain that core of wholeness.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I would say.
I love it because I'm a big advocate for the fact that, where we place our attention kind of becomes the world that you live in. And it can be very easy to get like caught up in, the mystery and the trying to find the truth and the answers. And it can get pretty dark. But when you balance that out with, like you said, getting outside, appreciating sort of how beautiful the world actually is, and there is lots of great things to it as well, I think that is kind of key to staying grounded in all of this craziness.
It is, man. It is. It's so necessary.
100%, man. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on, dude. This has been an awesome conversation. Like I said, I'd definitely love to do part 2. Do you have anything coming up that you want to plug, or maybe just your socials?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram, Nathaniel Gillis. You can, I'll tell you the biggest thing, if people are interested in my research, which I know some are going to think I'm an idiot. Others are going to be like, okay, they'll be more sympathetic to me, whatever. I know how it is. If you're interested in my research, go to parasymposia.com and you can sign up for early access to my upcoming platform. I'm going to be releasing a lecture series on necronetics, which I'll go into every aspect of the teaching. And people wanted to buy it, like, other streaming services. But if they buy that, they have reign over the content and everything else. And it's like, it's my work. So I'm going to put it on my platform, right? That's what you guys could do. You guys can also, like I said, follow me on Instagram, follow me on YouTube, and sign up for Parasymposia. But thank you so much for having me on, brother. I've not felt the best, and people probably see that with like me, going blank on names or something. But I'm glad you had me on, brother. So thank you.
No, it was a pleasure, man. And I thought you were great. And I'll leave all those links in the description, so it'll be much easier for people to go ahead and grab. But until next time, man, thank you and take care.
All right, brother. Have a good night, man.
Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on?
No matter how far you go into the dark, when you flip, you go exactly the same place to the light in our galaxy. Everything. Because everything is in balance. Everything is a polarity.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is.